There's no doubt that the world economy is in big trouble. There's been a huge rise in debt, and the stock market has fallen from its all-time high. At this point, you're probably wondering what measures you can take to protect yourself. Fortunately, lawyer, investment banker, speaker, media commentator, and author of several best-selling financial books, Jim Rickards, has the answers you're looking for. But why does he have the answers, and why should you trust what he says? Has he ever predicted anything right before? Well, firstly, he negotiated a major corporate bailout for $3.6 billion in 1998. He realized that Kevin O'Leary's words were empty in regards to FTX, and he also successfully predicted the crash of FTX. In fact, he went as far to say that crypto will likely bomb completely, as the current state of the economy and the elites have no real use for it. In fact, it threatens the status quo more than it benefits it, giving them all the more reason to stay away from it as an investment. In 2019, Rickards released Aftermath, which became a bestseller, and its topic primarily revolves around how the world's markets are artificially inflating. One of the biggest sectors to have inflated big time is Bitcoin, which led to his thoughts on FTX. To go a step further, he realized in 2018, when Bitcoin's first major crash happened, that it was just a forewarning as to what will come, and it started with the FTX crash, where about $1 billion vanished from investors' pockets. The truth is that it was a Ponzi scheme, and thankfully it was exposed before it got any worse. However, if you can't invest in Bitcoin, and stocks seem out of the picture due to decline, what can anyone invest in? It turns out that Jim Rickards' specialty is actually around precious metals, but more specifically, gold. Not surprisingly, he's very stern in saying that gold is the best weapon that anyone can harness due to this incredibly difficult time. For starters, he talks about the dangers of Chinese gold acquisitions and their currency manipulations, making things seem better or worse than they actually are. If you want to learn more about this, then get this video to 300 likes and we'll make a video on it. With that in mind, the very old saying that gold is the ultimate safe haven still seems to be true. According to Rickards, there are 4 major reasons why gold should be your go-to. Firstly, it'll protect your wealth from major inflation and currency issues. It's still one of the most useful benchmarks for currencies, despite the world's currencies not being directly tied to gold anymore. It buffers against unpredictable political landscapes, and it also protects against market volatility. And if anyone knows, the volatility is absolutely insane over the past few years. You may be wondering why gold is such an important asset, and to answer this, we'll look at what the world's elites are doing. Firstly, most global elites are stocking up on gold in a manner that's never been seen before. It's most likely that they're anticipating a financial collapse and flocking to the one safe haven. On top of that, banks are also buying more gold than even seen before, furthering the validity of this hypothesis. Chances are that the banks know something that other people don't. Another area for consideration is the current political situation, especially in America. Rickards is very vocal on Twitter about how Biden's current policies are to blame for the current economic situation. He went as far to say that there's blatant dishonesty in how he's speaking of the situation. In fact, in Rickards' book, The Death of Money, which was written in 2014, he pretty much showed the exact situation that the economy is sitting in today. He talked about the current deadlocks in politics and the issues that America is having with Russia and China. Namely, China is seriously threatening the American economy with its growth. Another thing that he mentioned is the over-reliance on oil from Saudi Arabia and how it's hurting America more than it's benefiting it. This thought proves true in 2023. America is still tapping into reserves as opposed to finding ways to be more independent with oil. Sadly, America is not taking measures to be more independent, and it's slowly starting to bring the economy to ruin. Taking a look at the economic landscape is also important to understand the importance of gold as an asset. As of right now, inflation has been declining, but it's still extremely high. It's currently sitting at 6% as opposed to the target 2%. On top of that, recent data shows that the employment market is still way too hot, meaning that inflation is still a major threat. However, this causes the Fed to increase interest rates to battle inflation more. But the continuous and rapid rise of these rates affects the economy a lot. For example, the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank, as well as threats to many other banks and businesses. Of course, some might ask the Fed to change course, but there's not much that can be done to affect the supply and supply chains. All that interest rates can do is try to lower the demand by making things so expensive that people are forced to live more frugally. For example, you can't change titanium for gold in the supply chain, and you can't get people to stop buying things that they really don't need if they can still afford them. As long as people want stuff, they'll buy it. To look at this example in another light, the Fed funds rate hit a peak of 5.66% on March 8th, and the investment firm BlackRock expects it to go even higher. Of course, this means that they have to keep pushing interest rates up. Before I continue, be sure to subscribe to Investors Weekly so you can always have the best content about finances at your fingertips. It never hurts to gain knowledge every single day, and it also helps me out a ton. Chances are that the mega-sized interest rates of 0.5 and maybe even more are likely to continue happening. Unfortunately, this will lead to likely bigger and more severe consequences than we've ever seen before. We can see this because the Treasury yield is above 5%, which is the first time since 2007. Margin debt levels are twice as high compared to 2008 when the markets fell by 57%. There are about $1 trillion in the market currently, and there's a lot of debt lingering from the trade war with China. Sadly, the swiftest and most severe corrections are likely to happen in the stock market. Jim goes on to say that instead of having a nice and clean rebound after a huge dip, the markets may be down for years or even decades before correcting. The truth of the matter is that no matter how much money the Fed produces and puts into the financial system, there just hasn't been this level of inflation in the past. Looking at the history of inflation from back to the 1990s, it was actually dropping and averaging at about 2%. Fortunately, even in the most difficult economic times, there were always ways to survive and even get rich. Firstly, the best thing you can do is invest 10% of your portfolio into gold. It's still the most durable asset known, and there are several major figures who say the same thing. Paul Tudor Jones, Ray Dalio, Paul Singer, Robert Kiyosaki, and Dan Ferris are all supporters of investing in gold. Secondly, having cash is going to be surprisingly helpful. You've likely heard of the advice of having an emergency fund, and there's no better time to practice this advice than now. Having at least 3 to 6 months of income safely stored can change your life in this difficult financial time and in the years to come. Jim says that most people will be wiped out quickly when the market fails since they don't have a reserve. On top of that, there are huge risks for jobs along with unaffordable bills. The truth is that you never know when you'll get fired or let go because the business you work for can't survive under economic pressure. Having that reserve of cash can ensure that you won't fall as far as the business you've worked for, but live another day so you can find another job. There are even stocks that you can invest in during this difficult time that actually may make you money despite everything else crumbling. Typically, you'll want to avoid any meme stock companies and focus on the companies that have been around for a long time. If they've survived the many crises that have happened in the past, then chances of them surviving in the future are very likely. Some notable examples of billionaires who made these investment choices and made it work are Joseph Kennedy, who profited during the 1929 crash, Mark Cuban, who generated $1.4 billion in profits before the dot-com bubble, and the creator of the Monopoly board game made millions through the same strategy. But what do you think? Is gold a reliable asset to invest in during these financially scary times? Let us know in the comments below.